we are going to get into our next match. It is going to be featuring Andrea Piasso and Alessio Fuscà. So we are going to actually get to see that Aqua Breed Taurus that we have been talking about in this next match, which is going to be our first top 8 game of this tournament.
Yeah, and we are going to see it face off against Dondoso, which I also just mentioned. You know that Mirror Herb can copy those stats. And since the Dondoso is not playing Unaware, but it is playing Oblivious, it is going to be very, very aware of those boosts if the Taurus manages to copy them.
That is, yeah, and I think if you are Alessio, you kind of want to see that Dondoso for that reason. You would love to see your Aqua Breed Taurus get all of those boosts for free as well and really make the best use of that Mirror Herb item. You can see the accomplishments for these players on the screen now. We've got Andrea Piasso. He has had that day 2 at the recent European International Championships in 2023 and another top 32 finish at the 2019 European Championships as well.
Yeah, so 2 very, very strong players. You know, they're here for a reason. So I'm looking forward to a very exciting match here. But as you just mentioned, you know, Andrea might not want to bring that Dondoso into this matchup, or at least not in combination with that Tatsugiri, simply because of that Taurus on Alessio's side of the field, threatening it to copy those stats.
Yeah, and I think the one thing about the Dondoso on Andrea's side of the field is that it looks as though it's built to kind of function without that Tatsugiri as well, because it does have that disruption move in Yawn that you don't generally see on Dondoso so much. You see it more on the supporting options, but when it's combined with that Tatsugiri in the 6, yeah, it gives it another dimension for Andrea to kind of use. As we see, the 6 Pokemon he will be bringing, just to remind you all at home, is the Dragonite, the Glamora, Shenpao, Tinglu, Tatsugiri, and the Dondoso.
Yeah, I really like this Dondoso set because, as I just mentioned, also with Dragonite and Chien-Pao, you know, gives Andrea the options to go for more of an offensive playstyle or more of a defense playstyle. So Dondoso, maybe even working without the Tatsugiri in that, you know, with that Yawn move, can be just as detrimental, you know, as Dondoso with +2 in all stats. As we see Alessio's team on the screen, Goldengo, Amoonguss, Chien-Pao, Taurus, Tinglu, and Dragapult, another Pokemon that we haven't seen a lot of, but it does have a regional championship title to its name.
It does, yes, and it's nice to see it doing so well in this tournament as well, with Alessio kind of piling it up into top 8. Interesting Terra typing on it as well, with that Fire Terra typing, and the item choice, of course, is that Choice Band, so it will be hitting extremely hard, and especially when it's supported by that Shenpao as well, with that Sword of Ruin ability there, that will really benefit the Dragapult in particular and that Tauros.
Yeah, usually the Dragon type that we see in combination with Chien-Pao is that Dragonite with, you know, Choice Band as well, but the Terra Normal and the Extreme Speed. Which lets you go for also a little bit more of a defensive build on Dragonite, since, you know, with Extreme Speed, you're going to go first anyway, so who needs speed investment? But Dragapult being able to maybe hit a little bit harder, meaning that, you know, defensively, that Ghost typing might be a little bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you look at like things like Shenpao on Andrea's side of the field, it really is going to be susceptible to things like the Ice Spinner if it doesn't Terastallize, and that Sucker Punch, so you really have to watch out for the opposing Shenpao. Both players, interestingly, have a Shenpao on their team, and yeah, both have a Tinglu as well, so both choosing the same rune Pokemon to kind of benefit their playstyles in this match. You can get your votes in now to support your favorite player at home, and which one do you believe is going to take this top 8 match?
I mean, here's the thing, I played a lot of Dondoso back in Series 1, so I am quite a fan of it, but I really dislike facing it in Series 3. But honestly, I don't know, this could go either way. I feel like, you know, both of these players are so good, and they can, I feel like both of them kind of know that, you know, they have to watch out for, you know, Andrea has to watch out for that Taurus, of course, and might not even bring that Dondoso. Alessio might be able to kind of predict that, you know, and maybe go for something completely different. Maybe not even bringing the Taurus at all, expecting Andrea to leave that Dondoso at home. So, yeah, very curious to see how this game 1 will go.
Yeah, the Taurus, on the face of it, is actually a really good pick into the match for Alessio, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it. And we do see it lead out, as it leads out with the Tinglu on Alessio's side, and then Andrea's side leading out with the Tinglu and that Dondozo.
Yeah, Dondozo, obviously, thanks to that Oblivious ability, is not going to care about that Intimidate at all. And we do see two Tinglus on the side, on both fields. So Tinglu, again, one of those Pokemon I feel like we've seen a lot, but maybe not really talked about that much. We used to see a lot of Tinglu running that Fissure, of course, which now has dropped to almost 0% usage. I feel like haven't seen it at all yet this tournament. So yeah, players opting to go for Ruination instead. Does 50% damage every time and is more accurate than Fissure. Yeah. And we are going to see a Terrestrialization here right away, turn 1 on this Tinglu on what I believe is Alessio's side of the field, turning into that Terra. Oh, my bad. It's actually Andrea's side of the field in that Terra Water. So Andrea deciding to, go for that defensive typing right away, but Tauros decides to go for a Protect, so no Water move coming out here. That Tinglu hits straight into both Ruination, going into the enemy Tinglu, doing about 50% damage, exactly 50% damage, activating that Citrus Berry.
And then we are waiting on the Dondozo, which I believe locked into a Wave Crash, and it is going to be into the Tinglu on Alessio's side of the field, doing some huge damage here. A really nice turn here for Andrea, going for that Terrestrialization early on as well, that Water type, to give it take away the weakness to the Fighting type attacks and those Water type attacks from the opposing Water type Taurus on the opposing side of the field.
Yeah, that's one disadvantage that Alessio might have here. You know, Andrea can terrestrialize this Tinglu into a Water type to resist the Wave Crash coming in from the Tauros. But Alessio's Tinglu is playing that Terra Fire type, so cannot get rid of that Water weakness, and it really has to watch out for that. It can take one, it did take one there, but can't take a second one, and you know, if Andrea had decided to switch into a Tatsugiri here, that Tinglu would have just gone down.
Yeah, and the thing is with Alessio's Tinglu as well, it doesn't have Protect because it is holding that Assault Vest item, which is not helping it out this situation here. We are seeing the Taurus switch out from Alessio's side and the Amoonguss hit the field to better combat against these Water-type Pokemon that are now on Andrea's side of the field. Ruination into the Amoonguss, taking it down to 50%. The Citrus Berry activating there just to restore a little bit of health as we go forward, and another Ruination in return into the Tinglu on Andrea's side, further chipping it down, and another Wave Crash coming out from that Dondozo, taking down the Tinglu on Alessio's side of the field, and Andrea taking an early lead here.
Yeah, that's a nice knockout to get for Andrea, because Tinglu is just one of those Pokemon where we've seen it be burned and at just -4 attack, and still just being able to spam that Ruination, which can put you in a very uncomfortable position. So good for Andrea to get that off the field. Tauros is going to come back out here, putting Andrea's Tinglu at -2 attack. That Dondozo, of course, still not caring about that Intimidate at all. Amoonguss here on the field, though, now is in a position to maybe go for some Spores.
Yeah, and it's in particular into that Dondozo, I feel, is a nice target for that Amoonguss to go into now. The Taurus in a position to potentially maybe pick up the knockout onto that Tinglu this turn, depending on what it actually locks into. It have to go for a close combat, and then does risk taking those defense drops, which could put it in a little bit of a precarious position. You've got the support from the Amoonguss, though, where you could Rage Powder as well this turn, just to protect the Taurus and further protect it, but not wanting to take any risks unless you're going for a Protect.
Yeah, so since Andrea already went for a Terrestrialization, he cannot turn this Dondozo into a Steel type, so a Clear Smog could also come out, but actually Heavy Slam into that Amoonguss going to do a little bit of damage, bring it to below 50% here. And, you know, so if Andrea has the Tatsugiri in the back, then, you know, it is susceptible to something like a Clear Smog from an Amoonguss. So it'll be really interesting to see here if Andrea decided to bring that this game, or maybe just bringing the Dondozo to dish out some heavy Wave Crashes and maybe even a Yawn.
Yeah, and I think it's done its job at removing the opposing Tinglu already. I think those big Wave Crashes, knowing that it has to, if it goes for the Terrestrialization, it's just going to be super effective anyway. So it's an easy choice for Andrea to kind of really exploit here, and he removed it quite easily. The Taurus coming in with a close combat, not enough to take down the Tinglu.
Yeah, so this Taurus maybe a little bit more on the defensive side as opposed to the offensive side. So that close combat, not being able to take out the Tinglu, which has lost its weakness to fighting types. Another Heavy Slam here onto the Amoonguss is not going to be enough to get the KO, but Amoonguss going for a Clear Smog here, possibly predicting a Tatsugiri to switch in and boost up that Dondozo. And of course, since that Dondozo cannot turn into a steel type anymore, you know, could have worked out for him, but Tatsugiri not switching in.
No, and I think Alessio's doing all the right things here with the Amoonguss and the Taurus on the field, kind of going for that, knowing that the terrestrialization can't come out. You're going for that clear smog, and if it does get the boost, then your Taurus is going to benefit with that Mirror Herb that you've mentioned before. Now, the Goldingo switching in to activate the Regenerator ability on that Amoonguss, so just get a bit of health back on the field as a Taurus goes for another close combat into the Tinglu and finally takes it down from Alessio's side of the field and tying up this match from Pokemon numbers on both sides for both trainers.
So this Taurus is now at -2 defenses already. Dondozo going for a heavy slam into that Goldengo slot. That was the Amoonguss. Would have been enough to knock out the Amoonguss, but since it did switch out, not doing anything to this Goldengo. But yeah, this Taurus really needs to watch out a little bit now, since it is at -2 defense and can take very, very heavy damage from anything that comes in here. And we do see that Andrea has both the Dragonite and the Chien Power in the back. So not bringing the Tatsugiri this round, which I think is a good choice, you know, especially seeing that Alessio did bring that Taurus along with him. So, you know, if he goes for a Dragonite here, he could, of course, switch in the Chien Power later to let the Dragonite hit, get some very, very strong extreme speeds off. But, of course, he could also switch in the Chien Pao to let the Dondozo, who is also a physical attacker, dish out some damage.
Yeah, he's got some nice flexible options here. He is opting for the Dragonite here. But as you've mentioned, with the Taurus taking those 2 defensive drops already, it is going to be a little bit susceptible to getting knocked out this turn if it's not protected correctly, especially if we do see the Dondozo switch out for that Shen Pao. Goldingo on the field, it does offer some nice offensive pressure as well for Alessio. Has got access to that nasty plot and does have access to Thunderbolt, which is going to hit that Dondozo for super effective damage.
Yeah, and I want to point out here that this Dragonite is playing Aerial Ace, which we don't see a lot of, because usually Dragonites that play a flying type move, they're usually Terra Flying, and they play that Terra Blast to get a little bit more power. But Tara's going to switch out here, does not want to take an Aerial Ace at -2 defenses, but the Amoonguss is switching in, and it is at 50% HP, so now I'm wondering, especially with the Chien Pao coming in here for Andrea, this Aerial Ace should be enough to knock out that Amoonguss if he opts to go for that play. Although that does mean that the Goldengo will be free to go for a nasty plot. Dragonite not really being able to touch that Goldengo with the moves that it has, but it is actually Outrage going into that Amoonguss, but will still be enough to get the KO.
Wow, a huge Outrage there, but a really good, observation to say with the Aerial Ace. It wasn't, going for it into that Taurus, then Alessio had no good switch in that situation. The Outrage was chosen just for the duration of the rest of this match if the Dragonite stays on the field, but getting boosted by that Shen Pao as soon as it hits the field. And the Shen Pao in a position where it can put a little bit more pressure on that Goldingo now with that Sucker Punch or some of the other options that it's got available to it. Taurus coming in though, dropping an Intimidator onto the Shen Pao and the Dragonite here, so lowering that attack by 1 stage, just making sure that the Goldingo's in its best position as possible to take advantage of those nasty plus boosts that it's got that last turn. So the Thunderbolt's still a threat, but a Make It Rain in this position as well is going to really hurt both of these Shen Pao and Dragonite on Andrea's side of the field.
Yeah, and we do see a terrestrialization here coming out for Alessio. It is going to be that Terra, Water, Amoonguss, and as you just said, a Make It Rain here from this +2 special attack Goldengo could really, really hurt, but Throat Chop coming out into that Goldengo is not going to take that much damage. Wave Crash breaking the multi-scale on the Dragonite. Make It Rain coming out. It is not enough to get the KO on the Dragonite, and Chien Pao, of course, hanging on to that Focus Sash. That is another very tanky Dragonite right there.
Yeah, and the Outrage coming out. Does it target into the right slot, into the Taurus?
Not enough to
not
get
quite
the KO.
Enough, but doing a good amount of damage to that Taurus. The Goldingo, though, you know, if you hit into that with the Outrage, you're thinking probably enough to maybe take it down or at least put it into that sucker range. But this now, the Goldingo in a great spot where it is going to be able to potentially fire off another Make It Rain this next turn, which is definitely going to pick up the knockout onto both the Dragonite and the Shen Pao if they do stay on the field.
Yeah, that Dragonite, you know, having its attack drop might have played a little bit of a role to that Outrage not getting the KO on the Taurus. Dondozo switching back in here now. Wave Crash going into this Dondozo, not going to do any damage at all as a Thunderbolt comes out into this Dragonite. getting the KO easy. You know, Alessio realizing, okay, this Dragon Knight can easily be KO'd by a Thunderbolt, and if the Dondozo switches it, it's going to take super effective damage from that electric type attack. So Andrea now also down to only 2 Pokemon, and that Qianpao is at only 1 HP, so a little bit of an uncomfortable position since that Goldengo is still at +1 special attack right now.
Yeah, and the Shen Pao, like we've already mentioned, I think is not going to be strong enough to pick up the knockout onto that Goldengo. It isn't intimidated now, so has set that drop, so it will be able to do a little bit more, but you've got to feel like the Goldengo is probably just a little bit too far out reach, and then you're relying on the Dondozo for the damage output, but it's relying on the Wave Crash, and the Heavy Slam hasn't got enough to really do the damage that you need to the Goldengo, and I really don't think it has. Obviously, Yawn is another option, but you can't really rely on that when the Goldengo's on the field and it's got that good as gold ability that just ignores any status conditions like that. So, you know, Alessio's played this end game perfectly. He's put himself in a great position to take this first game in this top 8 set.
Yeah, and Qianpao going to go for a Protector, does not want to take a potential Aqua Jet from this Tauros, but it's actually just going to go for a close combat straight into that Dondozo. Going to drop its defenses, but at this point, with the amount of HP it still has left, doesn't really matter. And Goldengo actually going for a Thunderbolt is easily enough to get the KO on that Dondozo, so Alessio correctly predicting that Qianpao, you know, can't really hurt him this turn. The worst that can happen is a Sucker Punch onto that Tauros, but even then, I think Goldengo would have been able to kind of, you know, close this matchup, because this Dondozo cannot really touch this Goldengo right now.
No.
And Qianpao at 1 HP with only single target moves won't be able to take out both of these Pokemon. So going for a Sucker Punch here into the Goldengo does a good amount of damage, but of course Tauros will get the KO on that Qianpao, which means game 1 goes to Alessio.
What a great way to finish for Alessio. A really dominant performance at the end of that game there, with the Tauros being utilized really effectively. You know, I think showing not only its ability to kind of come in and utilize that Intimidate, how important that was. You made a very good point about that Outrage damage. The Intimidate was the reason why that Outrage wasn't enough to take it down. And I think if the Tauros had fallen there, it might have made it slightly easier to kind of work around the Goldengo that was the only Pokemon left at that point on Alessio's side of the field. But fortunately for the Tauros coming in, did survive after the Intimidate, and Alessio in that position after that nasty plot to close things up.
Yeah, and that is why Intimidate is just such a good ability, and we see so many players use it on different kinds of Pokemon. We do usually see it on Pokemon such as Arcanine or the rising popularity Gyarados, and Tauros, of course, having that ability, just another reason to, you know, as to why it is such a good Pokemon to have here. And I still really like the fact that Andrea decided to go for the Dondozo here without the Tatsugiri, because I did feel like the Dondozo did do its job in taking out that Tinglu, but Alessio just played that end game so well, so Andrea might have to think about that going into game 2.
I think if you are going into game 2, if you are Andrea, I think the Glamora is something that you have to look at because of its Assault Vest. You've got to find ways around that Goldengo, because I think that is the big problem for you. And when you look at options on Andrea's team, like you've mentioned, I don't think that the Dondozo Tatsugiri combination is the answer, but you look at that Glamora and it has got the Assault Vest, so it's going to be able to take, especially that Thunderbolt, a lot better. It's going to be able to take the Make It Rains well because of the Assault Vest. And then if it does Terrasilize, like you're hoping to kind of maybe bait it into Terrasalizing, you've got the Energy Ball, which is boosted by that Grass Terra typing that can hit it for super effective damage, because outside of that you've not really got too many options. I think if you bring that in combination with something like Tinglu as well, you could pressure it from a non-Terrasalized side as well as a Terrasalized side.
Yeah, but we are going to head straight into game 2 here. Amoonguss Goldengo on Alessio's side of the field, and Tinglu Dondozo here for Andrea. And yeah, I still believe that Tinglu is a very good pick here, you know, especially in combination with possibly that Glimora to really, you know, lower special attack on Alessio's side of the field and really tank those hits from the Goldengo. The thing with Goldengo is, you know, once you let it set up, it really starts dishing out some huge damage. But if it does go for something like a Make It Rain, it does drop its special attack by 1 stage every time it uses it. So yeah, Andrea might have to stall here a little bit. Amoonguss is going to go straight for a Rage Powder. Does not want this Tinglu to target down the Goldengo with a ground type attack, and is going to go for a nasty plot here, setting up right away, and it is suddenly again a very dangerous threat on the field. Tinglu going to go for a taunt here, making sure Amoonguss cannot go for any more Rage Powders or any more Spores. And Dondozo going to go for a Yawn into that slot.
Yeah, into that Amoonguss. Now, if the Amoonguss stays on the field, it will go to sleep this next turn. But I think because it's taunted anyway, you probably wanted to switch it out and bring in something else to help support that Goldingo after it has Nasty Plot. It's a nice option there for Alessio just to start getting some damage off onto the field, but does have to be wary about the Earthquake potentially coming out from that Tinglu that could hit for big damage.
Yeah, so both players already locking in second turn very quickly. Alessio switching in his Taurus here for that Amoonguss. Might be a very obvious switch in, and Andrea, of course, could double down onto that slot, but then you leave the Goldingo without any damage and just let it dish out and make it rain. It is going to Terrestrialize here into that water typing, so it does resist any incoming wave crashes and, of course, loses that ground weakness. Dondozo going to take a +2 Thunderbolt here fairly well for what it is, you know. Ruination, though, coming out onto this Goldingo slot, going to do 50% damage, and of course Wave Crash. Not going to be enough to knock out the Goldingo, but bringing it to fairly low HP.
I mean, that is one way to get this Goldingo into a low point where you can potentially pick it up with an Earthquake this next turn. It's a nice play from Alessio to avoid the Yawn Sleep from the Amoonguss. Also reset that taunt by getting the Intimidate onto the field, especially on to the Tinglu, which if it is choosing to go for something like an Earthquake, it is going to be weakened. The Goldingo probably just out of range now, and obviously the Tinglu on Andrea's side of the field at a disadvantage now because the Taurus is putting on a lot of pressure with these water type attacks that it does have at its disposal. We are just going to see a protect this turn from that Goldingo and not taking any further damage and stacking up a little bit more of that leftovers.
Yeah, and Wave Crash from the Taurus coming onto this Tinglu here, which I think is a great play since, you know, it is threatening that Goldingo a little bit. Ruination going out into that Taurus, going to do 50% of its remaining health. But Dondozo predicting that protect, going for a Yawn into that Taurus slot. So Dondozo here, a little bit risky to just leave it on the field since it could have gone down to a Thunderbolt. But Andrea may be thinking that, you know, okay, the Goldingo, if it does go for a Thunderbolt, then I could easily knock it out with a Stomping or just any move here in the range that Goldingo is. But yeah, Goldingo deciding to go for a protect, and Andrea correctly doubling down into that Taurus slot.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, you can't really, you want to double down now into that Taurus slot. You probably expect the Amoonguss to come in that slot. But if you're focusing more on that slot, it's giving the Goldingo a lot more room, and you can't really afford to do that because of those nasty pot boosts that it has got under its belt. It is going to be hitting a lot harder. And like you say, the Dondozo in a position now where it will probably go down to another Thunderbolt. So if you are Andrea, are you happy to kind of allow the Dondozo to go in? So it does open a spot for you to bring something else onto the field, give you a free switch into something. But I think, you know, at the moment, Alessio feels like he's got a big advantage, but I think Andrea doing everything right to kind of get the damage he needs to for potentially clearing up the field later on in this game, especially with that Goldingo.
Yeah, Amoonguss switching in back here for Alessio now, and Goldingo going to go for a Thunderbolt into that Dondozo, taking it out, no problem. But this Tinglu is free to go for a Taunt into that Amoonguss switch in, meaning that it's just switched in but can already not go for any Rage Powders or Spores. And I do want to mention from last turn that Protect on the Goldingo might have been a little bit risky because at -1 this Tinglu probably wouldn't have been able to knock it out anyway, but Alessio deciding he wants to get a little bit of leftovers recovery, and Dragonite coming out here for Andrea. So the Amoonguss, now that it is taunted, all it can really go for is it can either switch or it could go for a Pollen Puff into the Goldingo. And the Goldingo, it was faster than both the Dragonite and the Tinglu in the first game, so does have the potential to go for a Make It Rain, unless the Dragonite, of course, maybe goes for a Choice Band Extreme Speed, and maybe instead of the Tinglu, we'll see a Chien Power.
Yeah, we are going to see the Terrestrialization on the Dragonite, but it does open the door for the Tinglu to have access to that Earthquake now with the Dragonite on the field. But as we are going to see the Terrestrialization, it takes away that flying advantage that it does have, and it will go into a pure normal type, which will then make it susceptible to any ground type attacks. But here we go, there's the terrestrialization. As the Amoonguss leaves the field, resetting that taunt, and the Taurus coming back onto the field and dropping another important Intimidate onto Andrea's side.
Yeah, the Dragonite losing a little bit of attack here, and also Andrea not switching in a Chi and Pow here means that the Dragonite will be doing a little bit less damage. Goldengo's going to go for a Protect here, however. So Dragonite Extreme Speed firing straight into that Goldengo. So Andrea may be very confident that this Dragonite would have been able to get the KO even without Shinpow. Ruination into that Taurus slot that was the Amoonguss, going to bring it down to just a sliver of health. Goldengo now with left Taurus healing back up to over 50% health.
Yeah, and now the position is the Taurus is on the field. Now it doesn't really have the same sort of option like we saw in Game 1 from Alessio, where it can go for that Aqua Jet to break the multi-scale, which is ideally what you want to do, but the Extreme Speed will supersede that. It will go first. So you've got the option now, if you are Andrea, to pick off the Taurus with an Extreme Speed and then potentially go for a Ruination into the Goldengo, just chip it down a bit more and then put it into Extreme Speed going into that next turn. So you can see the angle that Andrea's coming at here. It's just whether or not he can execute and whether or not Alessio are allowed to do this.
Yeah, and of course Dragonite still has its multi-scale ability, meaning that any damage it receives right now at full HP will be halved. Andrea deciding to switch in the Chi and Pow here is going to lower all defenses on both sides of the field. So Dragonite here going to go for an Extreme Speed into that Goldengo slot at -1. Is it enough? It is still enough to get that KO. And that is a very, very important knockout here for Andrea. But of course the Taurus has not gone for an attack here yet. So are we going to see a close combat into that normal type? Dragonite is enough to get the KO with that critical hit. Oh my god, no, that is also a very important knockout for Alessio as well.
What a huge turn through the multi-scale, getting the critical hit to take that Dragonite down. It is, of course, a normal type, so it is going to be weak to those big fighting type attacks, but through the multi-scale, you don't expect it to go down, but unfortunately for Andrea, that critical hit was enough, and the Dragonite not around to impose any more threat like it has been doing.
Yeah, and you know, even with the Chi and Pow on the side of the field for Andrea, I wouldn't have expected that close combat to knock out, you know, thanks to that multi-scale. So critical hit there might have been very, very huge for Alessio, and we do have Chi and Pow Tinglu staring down Taurus and Chi and Pow now. And of course, these are the last two Pokemon for Andrea, while Alessio still has that Amoonguss in the back.
Yeah, and the Amoonguss can be a really big player here because you've got the ability now to switch out the Taurus, bring the Amoonguss onto the field, and then you've got that Intimidate active again. You can just protect your Shen Pow here if you are Alessio, just to make sure that you get it through another turn, and then when you get it in a more preferable position, then you can start attacking the Pokemon on Andrea's side of the field. Tinglu not on the best of health either. It looks very close to going down to something like an Ice Spinner from Alessio's side of the field, so you've got to be very careful with what you do going forward.
Yeah, but Alessio deciding to protect his Chi and Pow here is not going to take any damage this turn, as Andrea does target into that. Close combat into that Tinglu here is also enough to get the KO with another critical hit onto that Dark type. So I don't think that critical hit mattered as much, but still rare to see two critical hits from the same Pokemon in a row. So now it is just Andrea's Chi and Pow against Alessio's 3 remaining Pokemon. I mean, it is carrying that Focus Sash, but not sure if it can do much here on its own. Sacred Sword going to bring it right down to 1 HP. And now it is just one hit away from going down, but it is able to get that Sacred Sword off itself onto the enemy Chi and Pow. But this Taurus here probably just going to go for another close combat and win Alessio this top 8 match.
What an incredible performance from Alessio.
Another critical hit!
So determined to make sure that Alessio progresses from this top 8 to top 4. 3 critical hits in a row. The last one did not matter at all.
And
but what a finish.
Alessio who advances on to top 4. What an amazing match. 3 critical hits in a row. I believe only the first one mattered, but still very, very funny to see 3 of them in a row. Yeah,
really unfortunate for Andrea, I think, because he positioned the Dragonite in a spot where it was going to be doing a lot of work, you know, against the remaining Pokemon on the field. Taking the close combat in that situation still meant it was probably going to stick around on the field for the next turn, meaning that you have to contend then with another extreme speed, which the Taurus was going to get knocked out by. If the Shenpao comes onto the field, it's going to take a lot of damage, probably down to its sash at that point, and then supported by your own Shenpao at that point. So Andrea really did everything correctly, I think, in that position, and really unfortunate to lose it the way he did. But massive credit to Alessio for playing to his out, and the Taurus really shining through.
Yeah, the Taurus shining through even without that Mirror Herb activating in that situation. But, you know, even like without the critical hit, even with the Amoonguss in the back, you know, you have to consider it is Dragonite and Chien-Pao. And Chien-Pao, of course, we have seen them one-hit KO Amoonguss, and I believe the terrestrialization for Alessio, has it been used or not in that game?
It was being used on the Goldingo. So the Goldingo had got removed from the initial extreme speed, the turn that it got close combated. And
so Amoonguss also not being able to like go for a defensive Terra type there. So yeah, without that critical hit, might have gone differently. I guess we'll never find out.
Yeah, unfortunately not. But Alessio will be our player moving into the top 8 of this tournament and taking that Taurus one step closer to taking the championship. But again, I think the combination of Pokemon that Andrea brought, especially in that game 2, made a lot of sense for how to approach things. He kind of identified that the Goldingo was the big threat there, and was able in the early game to chip it down to a point where then he was able at the right time when the Dondozo left the field because it was knocked out to bring in that Dragonite. It's multi-skill intact, and then taking advantage of that terrestrialization and then the extreme speed boosted by that Shenpao. Obviously had to contend with the Taurus Intimidate the whole time, but knowing that the Goldingo had been chipped down to that point, was able to deal with it, not getting too worried about it getting boosted up with those nasty plots, etc. Just really unfortunate how the end game kind of played out, and that's just how it goes sometimes, as hard as it is to say that. But Alessio utilizing that fighting type perfectly and making sure that he was there, able to punish if the time was right, if that normal type terrestrialization did come out from the Dragonite.
Yeah, no, but still massive props to Andrea. You know, played really well. He went undefeated in day 1, so deserves top 8, of course, and obviously would have loved to see another game. I can never get enough of high-level Pokemon, but no, very well played by both sides. Congratulations to Alessio, of course, but also, yeah, well played to both players. Massive props.
Yeah, like you say, Andrea, I mean, going undefeated in day 1 isn't a massive accomplishment in itself. Carrying that on for the majority of day 2 as well until he was featured on the streams, keeping that unbeaten record. An incredible team, a really unique team, something that we haven't really seen too much of this weekend. The Glamora really making good use of that. He also had the Tinglu, the Shenpao, that Dragonite really showing its offensive capabilities, and then that nice combination of the Dondozo, which we've really seen nothing of other than from Andrea, and that Tatsuguri, which we never really quite got there to see that combination together, but we really saw a good use of the Dondozo outside of that combination in these last 2 games.
Yeah, we did get to see Andrea, of course, play that Dondozo Tatsugiri combo with the Terra Steel in day 1, and it worked out really well for him. Today, unfortunately, not as much, but you know, when you have a Mirror Herb Taurus on the enemy side of the field, you have to respect that. You know, you don't want to give it those boosts, especially since Alessio is also playing that Clear Smog on the Amoonguss, and yeah, you're playing Terra Steel, but you know, both games Andrea opting for a different Terra type, which, you know, may have been more useful situation. It was a very close game too, so I feel like Andrea did do, you know, go for the correct plays there, and unfortunately did not work out, but you know, luck and a little bit of damage rolls is always a part of competitive Pokemon as well. Yeah,
it felt almost like it was a bit late in realizing how impactful that Goldingo would be in that match, but when you look at Andrea's side of the field, he's got a lot of things that are susceptible to that Thunderbolt from the Goldingo, especially if you allow it to get a nasty plot up. We know how strong it is anyway, and you've got nice support options on Alessio's side, and really exploited that weakness in particular, making use of the Goldingo, and Andrea really didn't have the options to kind of shut that down. I think he identified that going into game 2, like you mentioned, but again, with all his best efforts, he wasn't really able to overcome in the end because of the Goldingo, the work that it put in early on, and then the Taurus, the work that it obviously we all witnessed it doing towards the end.
Yeah, and we also saw both players bring that Tinglu, of course, also in game 1 and I believe also in game 2. And it's, like I said before, it is one of those Pokemon that we've talked a lot about, like Iron Hands and Amoonguss, but I feel like we might have forgotten a little bit about Tinglu because we did see a lot of it as well. And it is also just a very strong supporter, being able to, you know, drop special attack on the entire field. And with Pokemon like Fluttermane and Chew being very popular, you know, if you're playing at such a big event, you're definitely going to be running into those at least a couple of times. So yeah, no, just an overall great supporter, and you know, we've seen it be burned, you know, by moves like Will-O-Wisp and had its attack dropped by Intimidates. Still being able to just go for Ruination, you know, you can't reduce the damage on that move.
No, definitely. And I think that the one big thing about the Tinglu is that the choice of Terra typing a lot of players are choosing. I think for Alessio in this particular match, it was pretty unfortunate because his Terra typing really put him at a disadvantage whether or not he terrestrialized or not, and it probably wasn't the most optimal play. But you can see in game 1, Andrea went for that water Terra typing on his Tinglu and really put himself at a little bit of a disadvantage against that Goldingo in the end, and I think that's probably where the realization came in. But I think you're right, with the Tinglu over this entire weekend, its ability is so oppressive against these big special attacking Pokemon that are so detrimental to a lot of teams. It at least slows them down slightly, and it's a really valuable Pokemon, especially with that ground typing as well. It's so good into this format in general, and the dog typing, the Ruination as well, having the ability just to take away 50% of an opponent's HP, so valuable, especially when you haven't got a clear route to be able to beat that Pokemon in particular.
Yeah, and Tinglu, of course, also good against special attackers like that Goldingo that we just saw, you know, be really, really dominant. And it's interesting to see here that Alessio going for a Thunderbolt over something like a Shadow Ball, which we usually see on these Nasty Plot sets, but in this case, kind of carrying him almost, you know, against this Dondozo and that Water-type Tinglu. So, you know, sometimes that, you know, other move that might not get that same type attack bonus is just the move you need to, you know, have a better matchup against things like, you know, maybe difficult water types.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the Goldingos that we've seen over the weekend, they have tended to run just the moves, the Make It Rain and then the Thunderbolt as their kind of secondary coverage. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at all of the different terrestrialization, the Terra types that a lot of Pokemon are choosing. A lot of them are those defensive typings to help out, to allow them a little bit more time to do their job, to disrupt, etc., etc. So the Thunderbolt really makes a lot of sense, and I think we've touched on it a few times through the broadcast this weekend. The lack of actual really good options for electric types in this format. So it really fills kind of a role here. We saw earlier on in the stream Fluttermane being used by David. He had Thunderbolt on that as his kind of way to deal with these water Terra types and some of the water weak, the electric weak Pokemon in the format. But I think that's the one thing you can identify about the format. We probably are crying out for a really solid electric type Pokemon that we haven't really got. So the players are filling the gaps where they can with these really strong Pokemon like Goldingo with the Thunderbolt, and then the Fluttermane that we saw as well on David's Fluttermane early on. But we actually have Alessio waiting for an interview, so we're going to throw it over to the couch. Let Simone take this on, and we'll get a few more insights on Alessio from this last match.
Welcome back. We're here, of course, with the winner of the last round of the topic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How are you feeling right now?
First of all, before they kind of insult me, great shout out to the builders of this team, Alessandro Lai and Dario Cozzo, because if I'm playing against a lot of favorite matchups, it's because of them. It's because of the team. It's a great team.
Okay, that's good to hear. So
the first thing.
So about that match, the Scopeless Tauros.
Scopeless Tauros.
Scopeless Tauros, as you told me. Getting 3 crits in a row, quite spectacular. Of course, that is a part of the game as well. The chances of that are very small to get 3 crits still, but the crit on the Dragonite, that was a good game changer, putting it into your favor. But especially that first game, I felt like the Goldingo was really good there in the whole match there.
Goldingo with Thunderbolt is something that I wanted. In the original team, we had Shadow Ball, but I felt like in certain matchups, like Dondozo Control, like that, Corviknight, Azumarill, that was becoming very popular on ladder, we were very struggling during testing. And I said, guys, we need Thunderbolt. We don't need Shadow Ball, because with such a solid team, we can set up multiple nasty plots, and we definitely don't need the stab. We can go for +4 Thunderbolt instead of +2 Shadow Ball on, for example, Arcanine. So it was the best choice on Goldengo. Yeah, it's a great Goldengo.
I think I agree there. Thunderbolt being a good coverage move there, especially for all of these Pokemon that have Terra Water a lot of the times as well. Chien-Pao Dragonite, trying to, the Dragonite itself not really being able to hit you, but you were forced to Terra quite early in the second game, so the Dragonite could hit you with an extreme speed. Were you expecting to survive in any way?
As I said to Andrea, I expected Tatsujiri, honestly. Because even if I have the Mirror Airborne Tauros, I have to stay on the field. And sometimes I have to reposition myself just to guarantee to Goldengo a drop on Tinglu and, you know, coverage with Among Us, because, to better say, a redirecting coverage with Among Us. Because if I, for example, Terra Among Us, Dondozo has no tools to touch my Among Us, because it's Heavy Slam and Wave Crash as only offensive moves. So I expected Tatsujiri, because he needed more firepower, and probably because you know, it's a great player. He is a great player, and I expected him to force me to leave the field with Tauros, and then in that moment going on in with Tatsujiri. And I expected that, but when I saw Dragonite, I was like, okay, didn't change the plan, I have to adapt now.
Now a little bit of adaptation in that regard. We have to talk about the Tauros, because that is one of those Pokemon that has come back. It is not at all the most used Intimidate user, but it's been working amazingly for you, really. Like, what's the secret there?
As I always say, in a lot of context, Pokemon, it's about context. Arcanine and Gyarados overall are better, but for my team, Tauros is the perfect choice. Because King Gambit is a threat, Annihilate is a threat. We needed a certain type of Intimidate. And Tauros Paldea Water, and the first time it was fire at the first testing phase. But we saw that Tauros Water, even not resisting Fluttermane, it's great because it has the priority. And priority makes the difference, because a lot of times I killed the Pokemon of my opponents with Aqua Jet. I have more kill with Aqua Jet than Wake Fresh.
No, really?
Actually, because you do a lot of damages with Make It Rain or Wave Crash as well. All of these moves, Dragon Darts. Few HP remaining, Aqua Jet is amazing.
It's a lot of calculations with HP, trying to survive a lot of things, and having a priority move like that is always nice to have.
It's great.
So, for your team, was there a really hard matchup today?
Round 6 yesterday, I faced another Dondozo Dragonite Chien-Pao, but that time Dragonite was inner focus. And it has Scarf Chill and Specs Fluttermane as well. So it was like, okay, I really don't know what to do. And when you put yourself in a position of constant launch of coin flips, you can win, you can lose. I hate when I don't have any kind of control. Because it's hateful. But overall, almost only favorite matchups.
Okay, wow.
And it's great because we really read the meta very well.
Absolutely.
And when you participate in such a great tournament, the half of the job it's on your housework, homework. And we did a very good homework.
You did absolutely amazingly with that. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much. You have your top 4 soon, but for now we'll be going to another top 4 match in a minute.